we're here to orient new pilots or people that maybe have not flown for Angel Flight West recently about what to expect, what kinds of responsibilities you have, and also what rights and privileges you also should be aware of as a command pilot for Angel Flight West. And let me refer to the FARs, which I know we all love and know, but 14 CFR 91.3 is the pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible for and is the final authority as to the operation of the aircraft. So I can't emphasize the importance of that enough, because there are times you'll feel like you have a duty or a responsibility to conduct a flight. And I want to emphasize that those pressures that you perceive are no more and certainly should be weighed against, your responsibility under 14 CFR 91.3 and also just being a good and professional pilot. So there are contingencies not necessarily well understood or known, but you are not ever under the obligation to take a flight if you are not 100% certain that you can conduct it safely and in a manner you are most comfortable with. So as inconvenient or as disruptive as it may seem to show up at the airport, meet with your client, and should you decide it's not safe or you don't feel comfortable in flying, you have the absolute right not to take that flight. And, although we don't have folks 24/7 to answer that call under normal working hours, you can call the Angel Flight West office and they will deal with contingency there. And, there are other pilots that can pick up those flights on time on certain instances, but you just should never feel that you have the obligation to conduct those flights. And so that is the one message I want to leave you with here. That's certainly something that wasn't well, iterated to me when I first started. And I think it's something that can make you very uncomfortable and possibly unsafe at times if you don't have that understanding. So if I leave you with nothing else today, please remember 14 CFR 91.3. So I have the benefit of some cohorts here that are very experienced Angel Flight West pilots. I am not by any means one of the more experienced ones, and I don't pretend to be, but anyway, I have Chris Bennett and Chris Jacquet with us here, who fly a lot with the Northern California Wing. So I'd like to go ahead and have Chris share some of his tips and advice for you. You want to go ahead, Chris Jacquet?
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So yes, I've been with Angel Flight, I believe, since 1995. So I have a couple of missions under my belt. So a couple of tidbits as you are coming to your first mission. First of all, be prepared. Come prepared. That's we all do that as pilots, but I think it's even more important because you have in your airplane people that may or not maybe or may not be very familiar with the environment, with flying, and that's something that you need to be prepared. So be prepared as a pilot in terms of the flying part, but also be prepared with your passenger. So my recommendation is when you take the mission, when you accept the mission, typically, I don't know, maybe a week, 2 weeks before the time, give a call or contact the patient by email, introduce yourself, and ask a few questions that are going to be important for your mission. A couple of important questions like, have you flown before with Angel Flight? Have you flown before in a small plane? Flying somebody who has flown every week for the past year to come to her hospital is very different than flying an elderly patient that has never flown in a small plane that may have some concern, fears, and you need to approach the mission very differently depending on on the experience of your patient. There are a couple of other things that you need to ask your patient, like for example, does your patient have any restriction with altitude? I've had cases where I had a patient, it was a little kid, maybe like between 6 and 9 months old, who had a feeding pump. And with feeding pump, there is obviously a mechanism where air can be locked. And if you go in high altitude, that can be a problem. So you need to be aware of that, because as part of your flight planning, that make a difference if you are limited to fly, say, below 6,000, or if you are not limited. So that's something that you need to ask your patient if there is any restrictions with regard to altitude or aspect of the flight. Ask your patient if they have any equipment. I've had patients that had IV. So make sure that you can hang an IV in the airplane, and that you will be able to accommodate the patient with this kind of equipment. If the patient has any equipment, like for example a wheelchair, make sure you double check all the dimension of the wheelchair and the dimension of your baggage door to make sure that the wheelchair will be able to get in. I've had a situation where the wheelchair, despite the different dimension that were given to me, despite the fact that based on the dimension the wheelchair was supposed to fit in the baggage compartment, I was not able to. Thankfully, we were able to fit the wheelchair in between the front seat and the back seat of the plane, so that ended up not being an issue. But had there been another passenger, that would have been an issue. So that's the kind of question that you need to discuss with your patient before. The reinsuring with your patient. Again, you may have patients that have some discomfort with flying. Be upfront with the patient also, and say that depending on the weather, I actually have a mission this Sunday, and I called the patient yesterday, and we discussed that. I said, we are in winter. There might be some winter condition like icing that may be an issue. I don't think it will be, but you need to be upfront so that if something were to happen, it's not a full surprise with your patient. And usually what I like to do is to, the day before the mission, you call the patient back and say, okay, now I have a good view of what the weather will look like. I can confirm, you can double check that their appointment hasn't changed. It happens. You can double check that they are still within the baggage limit that they gave to Angel Flight maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, and they haven't changed their plan. And instead of staying one day at the hospital with a 25-pound luggage, they are staying now a week with a 75-pound luggage. That has happened to me as well. Angel Flight is usually very good. The mission coordination is really good at collecting this information, but things change. So again, the day before, it's a good opportunity to double check those things. And on the day of the mission, be in contact with your patient. I like to ask them for a cell phone so you can text them when you are at the airport, when you will meet them. Usually I meet them, I'm based in Palo Alto, so I meet them in the terminal. If the patient arrives or has sent me a text that he has arrived, I'm pre-flighting my airplane. I send them a text telling them that I'm here, I'll be here in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so that you get a constant contact with the patient. So those are some of the tidbits that I've collected over time. I'm sure there will be more questions as we go. I'd like to pass on to Chris, the other Chris, to get some of his input.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks, Chris. So I just have 4 things. One, AOPA has actually it's an excellent public benefit flying course. If you haven't checked that out, I'd encourage you to do that. It's actually really good. And I'd flown quite a few missions when I first did that, and I still found it really helpful. And it emphasizes a bunch of the stuff that we've been talking about. The second is my airplane is fantastic in all sorts of ways, but it doesn't have a huge useful load. So I sort of triple check the weight and balance. And it's not just the luggage that can get you into trouble. Sometimes people weigh more than they used to, or they're sort of optimistic about what their weights actually are. So that's something I go over pretty carefully with folks. Just be upfront, sort of, I mean, I try to make light of it, but sort of, assume your life depends on it. So how much is this actually going to weigh when you show up? So there aren't a lot of surprises there. That has caught me by surprise once. And then the other thing, and it's related to the fact that we're not Southwest Airlines, is some discussion about what the passenger's plan B is, so that you have some insight, so you can have an open discussion with them about, so if the weather goes sideways, and if there's icing, like Chris was talking about, what's the plan here? How does that work out? So you can not negotiate, so you can have an interactive discussion about an informed discussion about what's going on. And then the last practical thing I would suggest is, and I've found this helpful for quite a bit of people I've interacted with who are doing missions for the first time, you might want to consider a small step ladder. I bring a small, it's only about 12 inches tall, and it's a folding step ladder, and that makes it a lot easier for people to get in and out of the airplane. It's not a huge jump to the first step, but that just it seems to make things a lot more comfortable for people. So those would be my 4 suggestions, and then we'll see how we deal with questions.
Thanks for referencing that, Chris. Anyone who's gone through our orientation recently, that public benefit safety course is on there. I put the link in there too. If you haven't done that in a while, I would always recommend brushing up on it. Like Chris said, it does cover a lot of the factors looking at your first flight. So I would recommend that. I do see a question here from Matt. He says, I have my first mission scheduled in early March. It's a multiple leg mission. I'm the second leg. At this point, the first leg is not filled. What is the process I need to be aware of if the mission completion is up in the air?
You want me to take that one, Gil?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, you guys are better equipped to answer those.
Okay, so the answer to that, Matt, is we're constantly working, just like when you requested your mission. Some pilots request them early on, others request them later on. It is not uncommon sometimes in a multiple leg mission for one pilot to be the only pilot on the 3-leg mission, are you 2 or 3 legs, but however many, there's oftentimes one leg doesn't get filled until later on down. If you are the first leg pilot, it is always good to call the passenger and say, hey, I'm your first leg pilot. I'll be in touch with you later when the other pilots are assigned, because that first leg pilot will be the pilot that does all of the communication. The passenger should have received notice that you were assigned, you're the second leg. So you can just hold tight. You can always contact the office, ask us how we're doing on it, and let us know if there's any change you'd like to make in relay spots. That's another important thing that can help pilots just for ease and also for making safer decisions. If you find a better airport that's close by that you think would be better for us, just let us know. Does that answer your question? Great, thanks. Josh, there was one above that too. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I do see that. And by the way, anyone that may have a question, there's a break, feel free to unmute and just jump in and ask anytime. We'll keep going through the chat if you'd rather do that too. And just for the presenters, I just did a quick poll on who's watching. About half of the folks that are watching have not flown their first flight. A little less than half have, and then there's several that have flown a long time ago but are kind of tentative to get going again. So this is probably to Chris Jacquet, based on your conversation about altitude. So with regards to altitude, could you specifically talk about recommendations for oxygen and clearing its use with the patient? Often in the Pacific Northwest, the best weather is up high. However, I do not want to stress a patient with O2 or trigger a health problem. And actually, before you jump in there, Chris, I'll just say real quick, from a process standpoint at Angel Flight, all of our flights are non-emergency, so we're never transporting someone that's critically ill or that needs assistance in the aircraft for their health condition. And in fact, every patient has to have a medical release signed by a physician that says altitude and non-pressurized aircraft isn't going to affect their health adversely. Now, with what Chris said is true, that there are certain situations like feeding tubes and pulmonary issues that can be affected by altitude, and certain people, even if they don't have pulmonary issues or heart that are going through treatment, oxygen levels may be a challenge for them. So I'll let Chris comment on that real quick, and then if I need to comment some more on kind of best practices for that, we will.
So personally, I made the conscious decision to fly at altitude where I don't need oxygen for either for myself or for the patient. I know that based on the condition, wind condition, that may add a few minutes to your flights, or and maybe it's not the way you would have flown if you were by yourself or with your family on the plane. But with patient, I think that it adds a degree of complexity, potential stress to have them get with a cannula and get oxygen from the plane. That's something that I've chosen not to do with my patients.
So the only one altitude thing that's a little different than the questions, but it's related to that, is occasionally you'll have a passenger who's had a medical procedure where they've had a biopsy of some kind, and the medical team gets really twitchy about flying after some of those things. And so you need to have a discussion with your passenger, and the medical people sometimes don't understand that little airplanes can fly at different altitudes, different pressure altitudes than big airplanes. So sometimes the prohibition is, you can't go in a pressurized airplane because inside pressure might be 9 or 10,000, say 7 to 8,000 feet. But you can get in and out of the Bay Area at 5,000 feet or 4,000 feet. And that, as long as the medical team understands that, then everything's fine. So just be aware that's another factor associated with altitude, where sometimes the little planes can actually do better than Southwest Airlines.
Yeah, so a couple comments about that. One is directly to the question, I believe, is you're asking if you want, if you feel like you want to use oxygen and you want to use it for your patient, how do you approach them? There's no problem with that. If you're uncomfortable approaching your patient or passenger to talk to them about that, please contact the office and we'll do that for you. Sometimes we can do that, and just make sure they understand that there's not a problem if you use the oxygen, that that's a common practice in flying. So there's that. And as Josh alluded to, we do have a medical release sign for all of our passengers that say they can fly in a non-pressurized plane. To your point, everybody, it's true that their medical conditions can change and we're not aware of it. If we know somebody's medical condition has changed, we get a new medical release for them. So, and if you find a passenger at any time, you feel that their health is such that you don't feel they're safe flying in a non-pressurized airplane, please let us know right away, and we'll take care of that. That's for those of you that saw our presentation on Tuesday morning. Our first priority is always safety. So that includes the aircraft, but it also includes the health of the passengers on board. So feel free to let us know at any point. And Chris mentioned that passengers don't always give the right weight. And there's a lot of things like that we don't necessarily capture. They may not be forthcoming. Sometimes passengers are really desperate to get to treatment, so they'll sort of give a little bit rosier picture. So if you see anything that you feel is not appropriate, let the office staff know. And there's a 24-hour number. So when we're not in the office, if you are flying a mission on the weekend or something, you can always reach somebody.
And then just one last comment on that I hear from a lot of pilots, and I'd reiterate to Sherry, please let us know, because we follow up with all the medical facilities and the patients on those situations. And obviously we want to keep everyone safe, both patients and volunteers. a lot of pilots like to fly with pulse oximeters just to have peace of mind. And they're pretty cost effective nowadays. You know, they go right over your finger, and you can see both your and the, you know, passenger's pulse oximeter if you were to get a couple of them. And that's another good thing to say, you know, as you're elevating and that's dipping lower for your passenger, then, you know, you might either put them on oxygen if you have oxygen in your aircraft, or find a different route, or, you know, say, hey, you know, I don't think this is safe, and literally turn around and go back and land, whatever the safest decision is at that point. But I do know, I've heard from several pilots that just like to have those in their aircraft for that peace of mind, to make sure that, you know, everyone's getting the appropriate oxygen levels that they need.
Yeah, I have one and I've used it, and I also had patients that had their own. I had a patient back in December that I was at 8,000 feet, and she asked me if it was possible to go lower because she was getting a low oxygen saturation, and so I asked air traffic. I was on an IFR flight plan, so I asked the controller if there was. I explained the situation to the controller. They were very accommodating, and they gave me a different routing, and we were able to descend to 6,000.
Yeah, and then again, just on any of those, after every mission, if you haven't flown a mission yet, we provide the opportunity to give feedback, and you do a mission report. So you report the number of hops times you have, and that's what you use for your taxes at the end of the year. But there's also any kind of safety concerns or anything that came up. So that would be a perfect opportunity for Chris at the end to say, hey, you know, this particular passenger had a pulse oximeter, and, you know, we were at 8,000 feet and had an issue, so we went down to 6,000 feet. That does a couple of things. One, it helps the coordination team know and flag that passenger for future flights, and to follow up with their healthcare providers and said, hey, you know, depending on what that route was for Chris, you know, let's say he was going over the Sierra Nevadas or something, obviously that would be a huge safety concern for us. So, you know, if that routing wouldn't allow for high enough, then we might try to find alternate transportation for that particular passenger. But then it also is a learning opportunity, like we're doing right now, that we can say, hey, this is something you might want to think about as a pilot. If this comes up, you know, you can ask the controller for different routing for different things. And then it's a learning opportunity for everybody from a safety perspective.
That's great advice there, Josh. Let me just jump in here. There's been another note from Rob about bringing things like steps and accommodations for your patients. I think an important aspect, which both Chris's touched on, was getting the level of communication established with your client or your patient there. We don't know if they've flown with us before, and so it's good to know that information. Certainly someone that has not flown, you don't know. They don't know, you don't know. So you get all the questions out of there as much as you can, and it'll give your level of comfort a much higher starting point there. Be prepared for, you know, just some curveballs there. You know, there may be some unexpected situations that, you know, you'll have to decide as pilot in command if this is something you're comfortable with proceeding with. But there are other things like simply anticipating, and this is something that's not very common, but something I've run into, is something like a seatbelt extender. You know, some normal aircraft seatbelts were designed for passengers in the 1970s. They may or may not accommodate a passenger of today's weight and height. So although it may be uncomfortable, and it's not your responsibility necessarily to do so, but somebody should determine whether a normal seatbelt is going to be adequate there. Making sure that, you know, with your understanding of that passenger's level of experience, that they have some degree of familiarity with what's going on here, you know, and they're going to fly, if they are experienced, they've maybe flown with a dozen other people too that may not be exactly the same as you. So don't be afraid of giving them a dialogue about, hey, this is what's going to happen. You know, we're going to pre-flight the plane now. I'm going to load you in. Your baggage is going to go here. Lead them by the hand. You know, there's no harm in, you know, vocalizing what's going on there. And that kind of gives you a chance to maybe go through your own mental checklists or your own physical checklists about what those things are that you want to cover to make sure your flight is conducted in a safe manner there. I even like to go over route of flight information with the patient. Sometimes they don't know how they're getting back. And maybe even though they've been on an Angel flight before, they don't realize that they're going to fly right over their house, or they're going to fly over a part of town they've never seen from the air. And that kind of breaks up a lot of the anxiety of flying, especially for inexperienced passengers, is that they get to appreciate the sightseeing benefit of what it is you're providing there. I have the luxury of having my commercial license. So even though I've never flown professionally, I like to, pretend the part. And it really gives you the opportunity, I think, to step up to that level of professionalism and piloting that you aspire to. So, you may not be an airline captain, but who's to say you couldn't be? And why can't you, follow procedures and fly expertly and critique yourself after every flight to make sure that you get better, use this as a learning opportunity, and you impress upon our Angel Flight clients that we are a professional, dedicated organization, that are committed to their safety. So I just wanted to share those kind of final moments here. How many people here are interested in the Earth Angel component of this? We're supposed to cover those questions as well. Are there anyone that does Earth Angel? Does everyone know what an Earth Angel is?
That'd be good to describe, and then.
Yeah, why don't, Sherry, I'll hand it off to you and maybe you can go over that part.
Sure. So Earth Angels are pretty much what they sound like. They are the ground version of a command pilot. So Earth Angels are people that will pick your passenger up either at the medical facility or lodging facility and bring them to you at the airport, or they'll pick them up at the airport and deliver them to wherever they're going. It is a relatively new program. We've been doing it for a number of years, but it's been, we haven't been able to put a lot of effort into it. For those of you that heard, we recently got a grant from the Hilton Foundation that is going to allow us to get an Earth Angel coordinator. So that person will actually be recruiting new Earth Angels, getting them oriented. What this does for you, the pilot, is make your job easier because you aren't worried about how they're going to get there. You're not worried about a lift not showing up. It has not been uncommon for a pilot to land at the Oakland airport with a passenger, and passenger gets out of the plane and says, "Thanks for flying me here. Now, how do I get to my medical appointment?" And you, the pilot, are standing there, "I don't know." So again, beating the drum here, always call the office if you have an issue. We can handle that for you. More and more, though, we are already pre-planning the ground legs with the passengers. So either we know they're able to do it on their own, we know we have to arrange a lift or an Uber for them, or we know we have an Earth Angel. If there is an Earth Angel assigned, it should be up to you and that Earth Angel to communicate. So if you're taking somebody to the medical facility or to their treatment, you make sure that you communicate with the Earth Angel to tell them where you're going to be and what time you plan to land. If they aren't aware, make them aware of Flight Aware, give them your tail number and or your Angel's Flight call sign number. So if your tail number is November 1234 and that's what you're flying under because you're picking up a passenger, use that. But if you're using your Angel Flight call sign, then you would use November Golf Foxtrot 1234, and that also is able to be found in FlightAware. So make sure you give them that information. If you are picking up a passenger to take them home, same holds true. Make sure you communicate with the Earth Angel what airport you're going into, what FBO or terminal you'll be at, and what time you'll be there. Same thing with your tail number. Then they can watch for you, and timing is not so much of an issue.
A couple questions here now in the chat. I'll go ahead and jump into the. Tom Curran asks, is there a realistic minimum time required to obtain a medical release? Example, someone shows up on the plane and it's clearly not in the same position that you and or the pilot expected. Do we cancel that, or can we get a medical release in a short amount of time?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. So in general, we get a new medical release every year. So that's the sort of background to that. However, if somebody does show up at the airport And their medical condition is one that you don't feel is safe to fly, you should notify us immediately, not take that passenger. It is not likely that we'd be able to get a medical release for that passenger in that short time while you're waiting on the ground there to take off. So, and additionally, even if we had that medical release and you didn't feel safe, we want you to tell us, no, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And if you have to do this, let us know. If you're flying a passenger and midway through the trip, as Chris mentioned and Josh already addressed, somebody has issues with altitude or any other problems that may come up, let us know and we will follow up with their physician once the mission is over so that situation doesn't come up a second time.
And Tom and all the volunteer pilots on here, feel free to correct me if you've experienced otherwise. But in my time at Angel Flight, which has been over 15 years, I think I can count on one hand how many times that a pilot has said, you know, I don't feel like this patient's able to fly. So it's not like that's going to be something that would be a rare exception. Most of the folks that you're going to fly, you may not even be able to tell they're sick because they've got stuff going on, or you know, they might be in recovery, they might be doing pre and post transplant. You know, there's a whole host of illnesses that happen. So most of the time, you on your flight, you're not going to be able to tell. And I would say, in general, on the way to your appointment, the patient's going to be a little nervous and probably maybe potentially more chatty. And on the way home, they're probably going to sleep for most of it. That's just a general rule. Everyone's a little bit different. And then I also say this to new pilots, you're going to get 90%-ish that you're going to walk away with these warm and fuzzy feelings because that person was so grateful and so happy. And you might have 10% or less where they've got their own stuff going on. They're bitter that they're ill. You know, you don't know what's going on. And we're not walking in their shoes, but you might not get those warm and fuzzies. And that's okay too. And you can also always let us know that they, you know, if someone was rude or whatever else, because we do have a protocol for that as well, because we want this to be a positive experience for everybody on all the way around. But just in general, those are some other kind of thoughts that popped to my head when I heard everyone talking and I'm seeing some of these questions. We got another one from Matt. I know creating a professional culture is important to AFW. I don't remember specifics in online training, but is there a dress code for the organization and its volunteers?
Suit and tie.
Look, Josh has been around a long time. I've been around a little bit longer. Actually, Chris Jacquet beats me. So I've been around since 1997 and things have changed a lot, but I'll tell you, I've seen it all. I've seen guys show up in flight suits. I've seen, you know, T-shirts and shorts. Can remember once many years ago, we had a pilot show up and one of the other pilots told me, hey, I think there's a homeless guy standing over there. And I was like, no, that's just one of our pilots picking up a passenger. So they come in all shapes. And but what we, you know, the professional culture is absolutely right, Matt. And so we are looking to achieve that. So, you know, a polo shirt or a collared shirt of some kind on the website, Angel Flight West. I don't know, Josh, if you've got the link to the story you can put in there, but we do have logoed clothing that you can purchase. And so there is no dress code per se. We want you to look professional at least and sort of cleaned up. You know, business casual is always good. Having said that, for those of you that might be down in the Southwest, summertime, it can be hotter than blazes. So there is nothing inappropriate if you're wearing shorts, you know, and a lightweight shirt. You need to dress for the weather to make sure you're comfortable in your airplane.
Yeah, Paul actually has a good suggestion down here. Paul Henderson, one of our Washington, Oregon pilots. He likes to send a picture to the patient on, you know, what he's going to look like when he shows to pick them up. I know other people on the dress like to do that too. Either it's an Angel Flight hat or a shirt from the store, and I just dropped that link into the chat. It's a good defining. But I know another guy that wears red shoes, and he said, "I'll be the guy in the FBO with red shoes," and he wears red, you know, tennis shoes. So just having something kind of that people can pick you out because, you know, sometimes an FBO is going to be busy or whatever. and know that they're Angel Flight. I chuckled because we got a letter from someone when we were doing some feedback for this, and she goes, "Oh, I never have trouble finding my pilot. It's always the nicest looking, or it's always the person who looks kindest in the FBO." I thought that was a good note.
Let me jump in there, Josh,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. I think it's helpful, and again, to add to the professionalism, is to wear your badge and lanyard. It's a small thing, but it makes you look more official. I think as you go through the FBO, you'll get treated a little bit differently, more like a professional pilot. And certainly looking the part will give your patient a lot higher comfort level, because again, this may be their first flight. They don't know what to expect. And maybe if you look a little more professional and put together, that they'll have, less of the apprehension going forward.
Good point, Gil. And let me make a quick comment about that. As far as badges, if you're a new pilot, a new volunteer for Angel Flight West, you may be saying, what badge? So our badges right now have always been made in-house, and right now we are not in-house all of the time. Ivan, who is in charge of our badges, goes to the office fairly often. There's a volunteer who meets him there and works on those badges. We've had some delays. When COVID first started, we had a massive influx of pilots who became new volunteers for Angel Flight West, so we had a delay in there. And then just before the holidays, we had a significant flood in the Angel Flight West office, which disrupted things, including our printer, which prints all the badges. So we're a little bit behind on some of those things. I believe Ivan is catching up, and we should be current pretty soon. So if you have not received your badge and you joined, recently, don't worry, it'll be coming soon.
Yeah, and I just put an email in there too. Feel free to send that to us. It's badge@angelflightwest.org. If you're waiting on that and haven't received it, please be a squeaky wheel on that. Real quick, let's go back to some of these questions. Tom Bennett, he is driving as an Earth Angel. Thank you, Tom, for volunteering as an Earth Angel. He's working on his commercial certificate. He doesn't own his own plane. He's wondering what % of Angel Flight West pilots rent.
Josh, do you know the number off the top of your head? Because I don't.
Last time we crunched it, I think it was about 20%, 20 to 25% that are renters or flying clubs.
Yeah. So I used to rent, and that's an important thing, because when you rent, you don't always find a plane that's in a good shape, and that will have the confidence look that some patients will expect. So that's something to consider when you rent, to make sure that you choose an airplane that is in good shape. I mean, the airplane, you can have a brand new airplane, brand new, but what the passenger will look is the leather on the seat, and how clean is the inside of the plane, which is more important for them than what they don't see. So consider that as well as one of the elements that will give confidence in your patient.
Good point, Chris. Yeah, renting is fine. You saw on sign up and orientation, the insurance requirements of that just requires that you're named on that renter's policy. And in some ways, it's easier on the tax side, because the whole cost of the rental is tax deductible. Whether it's you own, there's a formula of hard costs or whatever that you factor in there. Chris Cole, beside the AOPA link, what prerequisite training is required and/or suggested prior to first flight? And are there any opportunities to do a ride along?
John, can you take that one for us? Are you there? Okay.
Say again.
That's all right. No worries. Chris Cole would like to know what training is required, and are there any opportunities for a ride along?
With regard to Earth Angels, with regard to mission assistants?
Looks like
regard to command pilots.
Command pilots and/or mission assistants. Yeah.
So the question is, are we flying right seat right now?
No, just he's asking about the training other than the AOPA link. So perhaps
Oh.
dropping the orientation link in the
Yeah,
chat.
training.angelflightwest.org is the online training center. In that, you can find links not only to the AOPA ASI Public Benefit Flying course, but in there will be the courseware for both command pilots and Earth Angels, as well as at the end of those courses, you have the opportunity to upload your supporting documentation. That's something I'm involved with on a day-to-day basis, so please feel free to reach out to me. I'm John J. at angelflightwest.org if you have any questions or need any assistance with that.
Yeah, and as far as the ride-alongs, right now we are not encouraging or allowing that because of COVID. Once that's over, then we do try and make some opportunities for someone to go on a ride-along with the mentor pilot their first time. But until the COVID crisis is over, we are not really recommending that.
Great, and I just put those links both to our orientation training and John's email in the link. So thanks for that question, Chris.
I just would say, with regard to that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm very happy to do a session with you, and we can cover any of those details. If you're a pilot who's yet to complete orientation, or you're a pilot who've already completed orientation, I'm here to be that resource for you. And if I don't have an answer to something, I'll find someone who does.
Let me also jump in there that, in the old days, we used to have something called a mission orientation pilot. And that was a role that I had the privilege of having, and where you had to actually spend some time with a new pilot and do a one-on-one Q&A. And I want to encourage, if you have those kinds of questions and you don't feel comfortable bringing them up in this forum, reach out to the office and they'll get you in touch with a mentor pilot. Maybe you just have a few questions that you want to get past, or maybe you just want to have a discussion about, am I qualified? Am I ready? Whatever concerns you might have, go ahead and feel free to take the opportunity to speak with a mentor pilot, because I think it'll get you over that hump and get you onto a very rewarding and a whole new level of flying experience that will change the way you think about flying.
One thing we haven't talked about that might be important to discuss is when you fly kids. Obviously, as pilots, we all have flown kids, but in this case, the patient might be a little one. I've flown up to 3 months old, so it's and there are a couple of things that you need to be aware, because you may not in your other fly with kids. So a couple of things to think about is refresh yourself on how to attach a car seat if you haven't done so in a long time. Make sure that your airplane can accommodate that. Make sure that especially toddler and younger kids, make sure that they go to the bathroom before you board, and because that the last thing you want to do is to be at flight level and have the kid and other mommy asking you to come down to find a place to land. That's not always convenient. Before takeoff, before boarding and after boarding, kids can sometimes be excited, even if they are sick. If they are sick, they might be wandering around. So make sure that on the tarmac they stay in the proximity of the airplane. That ask the mommy to keep them by the hands and don't let them roam and put themselves in danger or put others in danger. That's also a good tip to pilots, and engage with them. I mean, kids like to chat. Some kids are very curious about flying, so take the opportunity to engage with them, and they show them what. Show them the altimeter and show them how to interpret. All they see is a clock, and you can show them that that's actually the altitude where you are at, and so that's something that will make the trip a little bit shorter for them, and that will engage them a little bit more. Another thing, besides kids, I've had the case of transporting a dog. How do you call that?
Service animal.
Yeah, and so same thing. Make sure that the dog goes potty before you board, and if you want to protect the seat, bring something to protect the seat of the airplane so that the dog doesn't leave hairs everywhere, and also control the dog before and after the boarding, so that they don't go and endanger other airplanes on the tarmac.
You know, another quick comment about kids too is their ears. So for those that are very young, you know, recommendations to the parent that is with them of ways that they can help keep their ears cleared, you know, sucking on a bottle or on a pacifier. If they're slightly older children and you, the pilot, are comfortable with it, you could suggest they chew gum, something for those that can't, like we as adults can, you know, clear our own ears back and forth. Little kids can't. And I'll tell you, having worked at the Santa Monica for many years, and for those of you that have flown into Santa Monica, you know, it's not unusual to come in there and you sort of get slam dunked into the airport, and the kids' ears, kids would come into the office screaming because they weren't prepared for it. And so that's just another hint that we give to parents with small children.
Yeah, and then also I'd say, even though the FARs say that, you know, under 2 are not required with the seatbelt, Angel Flight asks that those kids are in a car seat and buckled in to the plane for safety considerations. Unfortunately, there was a bad accident in mid 2000s on an Angel Flight where had the baby in that case been in a car seat, they would have survived the crash. But the fact that they weren't ended up costing them their life. So that's another just safety consideration that we want to make sure that even though the mom's like, well, I could just hold them on my seat just for takeoff and landing, you know, get them in that car seat. Jason Petty asks, according to what I heard the other day on the waiver of liability session, we don't need to do that planeside now. Was that really the only paperwork you needed to do for the flight there with the patient? So now you just meet them, do your checklist, coordinate with the other pilots and Earth Angels, fly the mission, and then go home? The short answer to that is yes. Anyone else want to chime in?
No, I think that's it. I mean, part of the reason Chris Bennett was a big proponent of this for us, and thanks to him for his persistence on keeping at that process. So yes, that was part of the reason. Was it was just another thing that was added to pilots' checklist that wasn't a normal part of their routine, and you know, could get missed. Added a little bit of extra pressure on them, and so by removing that, we hope that it just made everything easier for everybody, and it's sort of a more sure thing that we have it signed. And I just want to make a quick comment about that, which is, and we stressed this during that session, the only thing is you want to make sure that the passengers who are at the airport are the ones who are on your itinerary. So if they do show up with a different companion, they show up to the airport and somebody's brought their sister instead of their husband, you need to check if we have the waiver of liability for that person. You can call the office. If that person's not flown, then we don't have one. So make sure that you then use the process for getting a waiver signed planeside. That video will be available, or you can call the office and we're available, or we're there to help you get that done.
Yeah, and if you have the app, it's built in there, and then it's in your mission day email too, the link for that waiver.
And it's also in the knowledge base. And any chance you could plunk that in the knowledge base, the waiver instructions, I mean, in the chat there. Thank you.
So Rob Brunner, there's several good notes here on wearing badge and hats and getting treatment. Rob also makes a good point. You might want to check the interior of your plane after the patient gets out, so they don't fly off with their cell phone pocket or some other, you know, ID or something important, wallet. That has happened actually several times. So that's a good note, Rob. Just one thing to make sure on your post-flight checklist that no one left anything in the aircraft.
On a related note, if you don't have USB chargers in your airplane, you might want to consider bringing a pack and a few cords. I mean, that's been a very popular item when you fly with people. They're usually using their phone when they're in their appointment all day, and their battery's like near dead, and they're trying to figure out how to communicate their phone. So That's just a small thing you can do that make their life more comfortable.
That is, that's like a pro Uber driver move too. I always like when my Uber driver has chargers in there.
And Chris, we thank you for that too, because that will help us, because it's not, you know, every now and then we'll get a passenger we're trying to reach and it goes straight to voicemail and they say, I'm so sorry, I was on it all day, my phone died. So that's a helpful hint. Thanks.
Dennis Malloy offers another good suggestion here. Be flexible. My first flight was from St. George to pick up a passenger in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City was IFR, so I was able to arrange to pick up the patient in Heber City, which was 30 miles away. On another flight to Salt Lake City, I landed at Spanish Fork, 60 miles away, and took the crew car to the train station in Provo. After taking the train to Salt Lake City, they got a bus to the hospital. And then finally, have airsick bags on hand. That is a good note, and a plastic bag to put them in. I found, and I've heard this from other pilots too, yeah, you just steal one out of a commercial airline and put them in your own plane.
Steal is such a bad word, Josh.
Borrow one from the commercial airline. They're pretty easy to order now too, by the way. There's lots of them on Amazon and other places.
Yeah, but the Ziploc bag is a real good idea, because that does fold it up, keep it contained much easier. So
it keeps the stink out a little bit.
And as far as all the different airports, you know, that's a good hint. If you do need to make changes, you can let us know and we can help you. Or if you have the ability, as you did, to get a crew car and make that work, that's great. Thank you.
Dennis says, my passenger asked if it was okay if just threw it out the window. Yeah, not so much. Well, good. Well, we've got just a couple minutes left here. Before we go, I just want to thank Gil, Chris.
Maybe one more thing. Language. I've had patients that do not speak English, and Google Translate on your cell phone can be a great help. So make sure you download the language they speak on your cell phone prior to go, and that can be a saver.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, that is a good suggestion. If you have Spanish speakers too, we do have several Spanish speakers at the office. So you can always put us on the phone with them and we can communicate that as well. But to Chris's point, Google Translate would probably do that pretty quickly too.
I had a situation where I had to actually divert because of a mechanical issue, and my patient wasn't speaking English, and you know, you can call the office when you're at 5,000 feet. That Google Translate was a saver that day.
Can I do Google Translate to get your great accent, Chris? Will that work?
Do I have an accent? You're the first one to tell me.
Hey, Josh, I had one more thing to add. You had mentioned, or Sherry had mentioned, about using the November Golf Foxtrot call sign. For those of you that are just starting out, it may seem like a big deal, but you'll be assigned a November Golf Foxtrot call sign to use. It's not a requirement necessarily to use it, but there is an advantage in doing so. It will require you to reprogram your ADSB if you want to be using it legally in flight. So there's a little bit of a hassle there, but the benefits you receive by using that call sign will give you priority routing and special handling oftentimes by ATC. And in busy airspace, that can mean a big difference in terms of your comfort and your ETA. So I encourage you to get comfortable with using it and enjoy the privileges it provides.
If your transponder allows you to do that, I would recommend it. I mean, I've had several circumstances where they've made turbines do other stuff. I mean, it's just the ATC goes out of their way to make your life more pleasant. They're also much more likely to respond to, in my experience, it seems like they're more likely to respond to requests for benign altitude changes rather than slam dunks if you have kids on board.
That's right.
And put the link there to the knowledge base. So if you want to know how to access that call sign, there's instructions there at that link.
And Greg is correct. Not all transponders allow you to change the number, but you have to be able to change the number. Otherwise, there's a mismatch, and so you can't do that.
And remember to change it back on your dead head leg.
Yeah.
And
actually, I do that before I shut it down.
Good.
So on my checklist, do it before I shut it down.
And also, as someone who's received these calls from controllers, make sure you close out your flight plan when you're done, because they call us and be like, "Who is this guy? Where is he?" And every time I call those pilots, I get a 2-word answer as soon as they pick up the phone because they know I am calling, and you can guess what those 2 words are.
Starts with O.
Yeah. The final question I see is folks wanted to know what Chris, Gil, and Chris are flying on Angel flight missions.
I fly a DA-40, huge useful load.
I fly a 182 turbo RG.
Let me also emphasize that, in case it hasn't been already pounded into you, that most of these missions are designed to be flown by a 172 pilot and a similar capable useful load. So don't be afraid because of what you fly to keep you from flying a mission.
Yeah, we get that a lot too, because a lot of our promo videos have bigger aircraft, but because they can take more people and film and cameras in them. So they're not always representative, and we try to make sure that they are. But yeah, 80% of our planes are single engine 4 and 6 seat aircraft. So all the aircraft you just heard from our panel here, those are our heavy lifters. I mean, not always weight wise, but in terms of doing the majority of our missions. Great. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'll just take this time to thank everyone for attending, and thank you so much to our volunteer pilots, Chris, and Gil, and Sherry and our coordination team. And we just encourage you, again, call us, email us. We know that there's like a little bit of a trepidation before that first flight, but I think all the pilots on the panel here would agree that once you get that first one under your belt, there's no better way to use your flying. So we'd encourage you just to go for it. Use the links and the advice that you've heard here and sign up for that first one. We think it'll be some of the best flying you've experienced.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gil. Thank you so much for leading this for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Safe flying, everyone. I encourage you to do it. It's going to change your life.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.